keep it near my desk because I read it as often as I need to, which is more often than I probably should. It was written by Charles Swindoll, and I heard it probably verbally the first time before I read it. I used to listen to Chuck Swindoll all the time on the radio. But he says it this way: the longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than the facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. It's more important than appearance, giftedness, or skills. It will make or break a company, a church, and a home. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude that we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% of how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. If you have your folder and you want to follow along, we're going to move fairly quickly because this is going to be a quick overview of all of the attitudes that we're going to be talking about over the next 8 weeks. To kind of set the agenda, we need to know a little bit about this whole Beatitude, Sermon on the Mount kind of thing. Jesus' command in this whole section is simply this: be different. All of the occasions Jesus' life that I might want to have to been present, I'm sure the resurrection would have been right up there at the top, but at least in the top 3 or 4 would have been the opportunity to hear him speak these bottom line truths about how he wanted his followers, you and me, to grow up and to mature in our faith. And basically, particularly if you read this whole section in context, you move over to the last part of this chapter, you'll see, you have heard, but I say to you. You have heard, but I say to you. What he is saying is, you have heard, but now I want you to be different over and over again. A key verse you will find over in chapter 6, verse 8. Therefore, do not be like them. He was clearly pushing, prodding us, encouraging us to be different. His unique teaching cut through the facade of religion like a sharp knife into soft butter. It remains to this day the most comprehensive teaching in all of the New Testament about how you and I are going to be involved, if we are involved in our faith experience, in a countercultural experience. If all that you do is simply within the context of a culture, then I would encourage you to look closely at your faith experience. Because there is going to be a part of it always that is countercultural. It offers a lifestyle that will be often at variance with that which you see around you. So number 2, there are 3 observations about these be attitudes, these be different attitudes. First of all, there are 8 attitudes that identify greatness in the kingdom of God. And this is not a multiple choice. I know I'd like to choose 1 or 2 and say, God help me with that. But if you read Lucado, by the way, we have some of the books available for those of you who would like to purchase them. If you read Lucado, you find out that he sees this really as a kind of radical transformation of the heart, and that all of these, and he's even connected them in a movement style of beginning and end, and kind of as you move through them, he's connected the dots and how that looks. First time I've ever seen that happen, but he does it, and he does it very, very well. Each phrase begins with blessed or blessed, whichever you choose. Blessed are those, but literally means that God has, if you are blessed, God has a tender place in his heart for you. That he has a tender place, that when he looks at you, there is a connectedness that is incredibly powerful. He has a tender place in his heart. Last night I did a wedding. The groom is standing here, and his 9-year-old son is standing here. And all of a sudden I hear his son saying, Dad, and I, not wanting to turn that direction, because I've learned through the years, if you turn, typically everybody else will turn. I suspect that he's getting ready to tell his dad, who we're getting ready to do the unity candle, that we have a candle out. Because he had gotten to light them, and he was so excited about that. He was so pumped up about that. So I thought, well, one of those candles has gone out, and he's kind of trying to alert his dad. Well, his dad looks at him, and then the second look was absolutely unforgettable. He looked, and then he looks back, and his son is going backwards down. He is white as a ghost, and he has fainted. He had been so responsible, so into the moment, that he lost the moment, and he was going down. Well, the paramedic came real quickly, and we took care of that. But what I remember the most is the look of that father to that son. It was a look of absolute loving terror. He was going to get over there. He was going to grab his son, and he was going to embrace him. When I think about the Beatitudes and my attitude, I want to believe that God looks at me in such a way that He wants me to have a tender place in my heart for Him, because I know that He certainly does that. And in the book, Lucado calls that sacred delight. What I saw between that father and son was absolute sacred delight, because they loved each other. The attitudes open the door to a wholeness. It opens the door to a wholeness that we find, a completeness, a satisfied. We'll talk about that word in a moment, but a satisfaction that we find no other place. Thirdly, each attitude has a corresponding promise. Really important to notice that. Blessed are the attitudes that you carry, because, in fact, there will be a corresponding promise to those attitudes. Christ holds out a particular benefit, and then He qualifies that with a particular quality of promise that He's going to offer to you. And again, over in chapter 7 of Matthew, if you read that whole section, the multitudes hear all of this, and they, in fact, are amazed at the teaching. So finally, the pathway to greatness in the kingdom of God. The intention here is to understand this Sermon on the Mount, this whole section here is certainly problems for those of us who are literalists. If you get into this section and you want to take every section literally, you will obviously struggle with that. Some even folks have even said, well, it applies to the clergy. Well, let me just say, that's not the case. Clergy are just like, real human beings. And so there's no perfection expected of us that's any different than anybody else. Others say it's so symbolic that they can't really find a practical nature to them. And I would disagree with all of those and simply say that every scripture has to be understood in terms of context. And the context here is clearly that you and I would be challenged to have an attitude that is countercultural to the world that in fact is around us. So let's walk through those 8 as we walk, obviously, to the Lord's Supper today. The first one is the poor in spirit, and I call that empty-handed. At first glance, it seems to refer to those who have little money, but obviously there's much more intended here. One of the best, certainly New Testament interpreters of a past age now, but certainly still very, very good, is William Barclay. And he's great with words sometimes, just to kind of take them apart and slice them up into pieces that we can understand. And this particular word, the empty-handed word here, the word poor, he slices into 4 pieces. He said originally there was a development of this meaning of the word poor that simply began simply as poor, and then it went on to mean something more than just poor. It meant having no influence or power or help or prestige. In other words, not just being poor financially, but not having any possibility of influence around you. And then it went on to not only having no influence, but being downtrodden and oppressed by people around you. And then the final one, which is where we probably are with the word today, he's described a person who, because he has no earthly resources whatsoever, begins to understand that his only resource in all the world is God. Well, my friend, I hope that's your starting point today. I hope that is your exact starting point. You know that outside of your trust in God, there is no real possibility for sustaining yourself in life. It is a picture of a person who sees themselves spiritually bankrupt and deserving of nothing, but believing that somehow God is going to rescue them. This spirit of humility is very, very rare in a day of the strong-willed, proud as a peacock attitude that we see around us. The clenched fist has replaced the bowed head, and the big mouth and the intimidating stare now dominate the scene for those who are seeking to be poor in spirit. It simply means to stand empty-handed. Nothing to defend yourself before God. You simply stand empty-handed and ready. Empty-handed and ready. A special promise follows each one of them. And here, this spiritual helplessness is followed by the promise, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the indispensable condition of receiving the kingdom of heaven is that you and I, in fact, have an understanding and a reality of spiritual poverty. Secondly, not only poor in spirit, but those who mourn or are what I would call heavy-hearted. Matthew, in recording Christ's teacher here, he chose the strongest Greek word possible here when he looked at the word mourn. It is a heavy word. It's a word that conveys the sorrow of a heavy heart and the ache of a soul and an anguished mind. Interestingly, the term includes compassion to it too. A sincere caring for somebody else, a carrying of their load, means that you will have a deep sense of mourning in your life. And the promise to those who have this attitude is that they will in fact be comforted. If you haven't noticed it already, there is a nature about this that you hear me often speak of, and that is God's forgiveness happens to you not so that you can hold on to it, but it happens to you so it can happen through you. The side impact of all of these Beatitudes is that they were never meant for you to simply hold on to, but always there's something that God does through you on the way to someone else. The two attitudes, extreme dependence and a strong compassion. Thirdly, there is the gentle or the sweet-spirited. The third attitude of Jesus includes a portrait of kingdom greatness, and that term is gentleness. The term is, when you look at it closely, is extremely colorful. It's a wild stallion that has in fact been tamed and brought under control. It's like last night when my granddaughter came to me and she had this red stuff on her arm, a little breakup of her skin there, and she wanted me to fix it. Usually I fix it by putting anything she comes to me, I put a Band-Aid on it. I put just a Band-Aid, because that tells her, okay, Pop did what he could do. And I don't care how big the hurt is, if I put some kind of, I could put the Band-Aid on her forehead and it would still be the same result in that, okay, Pop's done what he can do. Well, today I actually put ointment, and she just thought it was very cool because the ointment actually disappeared as I rubbed it in. And so here she was walking around with her ointment on her arm like this because we couldn't cover it up. But she believed in her mind that that ointment was going to do something. And if you've ever been in a place where you needed something done to you physically, an ointment, a pill that you take, something that is given to you to take away whatever it is that's absolutely bothering you, then you know what we're talking about. The promise for those who have a gentle attitude, it is for they shall inherit the earth. Now, we don't know if that means now or later. I suspect it means later, but I certainly think the nowness of that is that God allows you to be gentle in your approach to life so that you don't have to overreact to anything. Have you ever done that? Oh, I've never had that problem myself, but of course we do. That is that part of us that wants to be in charge. I told my class this morning, my pet peeve is people who don't stop at stop signs. And last night I finished the wedding, and I was feeling all holy inside, and I was feeling all warm and genuine. Everything had gone really well, and I'm coming home, and I'm getting ready to stop at a stop sign, and a guy in a big blue truck I saw him coming, but he never even hit his brake. He just came right through, and I'm stopping. But I did just kind of take my hands off the wheel and go. I really didn't think he'd see me. He was going quite fast, and all of a sudden he stops in the middle of the intersection. And I thought, well, is he getting out of the car because I'm going like this? Or is he really just going to stop? And he stopped and went, come on around. But there was in me, I said, was that a gentle spirit? My hands just kind of, really? But let's look at gentleness. Psalm 37 says, but those who wait for the Lord, they will inherit the land. Now that's the kind of image that I sense. That if we wait upon the Lord, that God will carve out enough of our life, a piece of our land, that we in fact can know the gentleness that he talks about. Number 4, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who are soul satisfied. The 4th attitude includes a portrait of the kingdom greatness as a kind of insatiable appetite, that we have this insatiable appetite, and only God can in fact take care of that. And this is a hot and restless and eager longing in all of us to not only walk with God, but to be pleased with God. Now, I've come to a conclusion that it is not possible to be completely satisfied with any level, any amount of ice cream. I've come to that conclusion in my life, so much so that my wife told on me the other day. My conclusion about ice cream is if the half gallon is less than half, that's a serving. And so in our house, if I go to that and I find less than half a gallon is in there, I think that's my serving. And usually I do that at a time when Neva is gone to bed or she's not able to see me. And I have this little method that I use, and that is I take that empty box and I put it in the garbage outside because I really don't want her to have to handle that. So I kind of wrap it up in a little bag and I put it out there. Well, I had wrapped it up that night and it was sitting by the door, and as I left for church that morning, I was going to pick that up. Well, I had both of my hands full. And I left the evidence by the door. Neva comes to Sunday school class and announces, I found the ice cream bucket. And I tried my best to explain to her that I was not satisfied. And so I had leaned in to helping myself beyond satisfaction. So I came to the conclusion, it is not possible for a man, woman to be satisfied ever by ice cream. But God says there will come a time in your life when every need that you have will be completely satisfied. The word there is a vivid word. Have you ever seen a cow chew their cud? I'm not making this up. A.T. Robertson, one of the great Greek scholars of the 19th century, he has a book about that thick on word pictures of the Greek New Testament. He says it's like they're chewing their cud. And even I remember walking on a road, McClure Road in Winchester one day, and I don't know that she'd never seen it, but we looked over and there was the cow with the most satisfied look on their face chewing their cud. That's never been a pleasant look for me, by the way. I've never seen that as pleasant. But what it was meaning is that there is a satisfaction to being in a place where mind, heart, thinking has been rescued. Fifthly, the merciful or the mercy moved. Mercy is a concern for people in need, and it's a ministry to those who absolutely need it. And here was one of those points where mercy is one of the key factors. Mercy, God's mercy for our lives was never intended to come to us. It was intended always to come through us. And the true servants of God will always be people who do what I think there's a reality show out called Dirty Jobs. I think some of our folks are so knee-deep in ministry that it seems as though every week some of you are signing up for whatever job is out there to be able to get some things done. So what does Christ promise? You give mercy, you in fact will receive mercy. And then my favorite, made note of this in my Sunday school class this morning, and that is the pure in heart or pure-sighted. It's number 6. It's the first attitude. Like the first attitude, it's a quality that talks about the inner person. It's impossible to have purity of heart and not have it internally, coming from the inside out. It does not refer to doing the right things. It refers to doing the right things for, in fact, the right reason. And again, if you look at it in context, Matthew, later on in the Gospel of Matthew, over at chapter 23, Jesus goes through a bunch of these phrases, woe unto you, woe unto you, woe unto you. In other words, you are a hypocrite. You're a person who puts a mask on your face. Back in Greek times, if you were in a play and you were doing a comedy, You'd put on a grinning face. If you were in a drama where it was more serious, you had some tragic lines to deliver, you would put on a sad face. It's a hypokrotos. It's the word for a mask. And here, coming up not too far from now, we'll see masks all over as we celebrate Halloween. Pure in heart. Seventhly, there are the peacemakers. Those are the ones who are the hand seekers. I call them the hand seekers. You're always looking for a way to find some sense of peace. And it's the only time in all of the New Testament where this particular word is used. And it does not mean avoid all conflict and confrontations. It does not mean to be laid back and easygoing and relaxed. It does not mean to defend peace at any price or to be passive. It does not mean compromising your convictions. The overall thrust about this, it's in the imperative, and it says the goal is that you don't wait for peace. You do what you can, in fact, to pursue peace. A peacemaker is a servant, first of all, who is at peace with themselves. Think about it. How easy is it to be peacemaking in other situations when you, in fact, are not at peace with yourself? In the words of Ephesians, the peacemakers preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of something bigger than themselves, and that bond is peace. And what's the promise for a peacemaker? They shall be called sons and daughters of God, children of God. Number 8, those who have been persecuted, or what I call faith rocked. Seems misplaced at first, but when you look at it, it's very clear. It doesn't ask when, it doesn't ask if you will be persecuted, it only says when. In other words, you're going to happen. It's going to happen. There are times when you assume the countercultural approach to being a follower of Christ, and in that approach, you will in fact be pushed back because of your faith. Tried to find this guy, the context of his faith. I finally found something about him. He's written a number of books, but died in the 20th century, a Baptist, kind of a theologian guy, although some of his books are broader than just theology. But T.R. Glover was his name, and I found that he had said these 3 things, and I wanted to find out more about it. He said, these 3 things will always be true, and Jesus promised these 3 things over and over and over again. He said, he promised that we, as followers of Christ, we would be fearless. Recall Peter's finest hour when he said, we must obey God rather than men in Acts. He says, not only will we be fearless, but we will be incredibly joyful. Jesus said, my joy shall be in you. And then finally he said, yes, you will be in trouble as well. There will be moments, Jesus said, in the world you shall have tribulation. Now, if he said those things, and I believe he said all those things, then how is it, and why is it, and how will we go about being ready to experience those 3 things? Being fearless, being incredibly joyful, and being in trouble. It's here. Because it was those 3 qualities in Jesus, that he was fearless, that he was joyful, and that he was absolutely going to sustain us, is why he told us to remember him. When it's difficult to be fearless, remember me. When it's hard to be joyful, remember me. When you feel like you're in trouble, you can't make it through, remember me.